So with that, I'd like to open up the floor to questions and discussion.
Could I just say real quick? I forgot to announce that there'll be refreshments afterwards out in the lobby area. And you can't read it, but what I've got up there is Facebook Palisades Shutdown Campaign, Michigan Safe Energy Future, PSR.org, BeyondNuclear.org. And we have an action area where you can write postcards to Senators Levin and Stabenow, shut down Palisades before meltdown. And you've got petitions on various issues like the proposal to ship radioactive waste on Lake Michigan to try to stop that, stop the mobile Chernobyl. Lots of handouts, including in the info rack, Palisades specific handouts. So please grab some info on your way out today.
So I hope I've challenged you. I hope you know that there are things we can do. There are great risks. There's a Canadian plan underway now to build a radioactive waste dump within a mile of the shore of Lake Huron, about 50 miles away from the eastern part of Michigan. And quite a number of us think that's a very foolish idea. Kevin?
I'd like to hear more about what's going on with Indian Point and New York Governor, Attorney General, people.
So would I. The Governor Cuomo is against Indian Point operating. The Attorney General Schneiderman also opposes Indian Point. But as of the moment, we don't have any specific actions underway. You know, there's no action that they have taken that is stopping Indian Point. One of the reactors at Indian Point, I would note, is operating without a license. It expired last year, but because they had already applied for a new one, they get to operate till they either do or don't get a new one. That's a whole other story about the waste confidence ruling from the DC court. But I would ask you, you know, could you get away with telling the policeman about your expired driver's license? If you said, well, you know, I'm going to apply for one, I just haven't gotten it yet. You know, it's not the way it works. But yes, sir.
Are there any examples of communities coming together to actually help shut down a nuclear reactor? And if so, are there any lessons to be learned for thinking about the Palisades situation?
I think an example would be in Vermont, where they shut down, well, it's hard to say. There actually was a huge effort. It's a very complicated story. It actually is the economics that shut down Vermont Yankee, ultimately. I think that there's not an example of a cookbook recipe about what to do this, but I think that if enough people, you know, I see this as a David and Goliath endeavor. The groups we've mentioned here run on very small budgets, and we're up against the Nuclear Energy Institute, which is very well funded. But, you know, I think of David and Goliath, and who won that one? So, you know, I think if we get together and work and pressure our elected officials, you know, you don't have to tell Senators Levin and Stabenow how to shut down Indian Point. Just tell them to shut it down. They can have their staff figure out what committees and what not to work. But I think get involved and be vocal. Way in the back.
What do you think should be done with all the nuclear waste that we've already generated?
So the question is what to do with all the nuclear waste that's been generated already. I think the best idea right now is to put it in dry cask storage on site at most reactors. Now there are some reactors like Prairie Island that's on a low-lying island in the middle of the Mississippi River. That's not a good place to keep any kind of nuclear waste. So there it should probably be moved a short distance to a safer location. But we don't have, no country in the world has a geologic repository. And we don't know what to do with it. We should stop making it, number one. And number two, get it out of the fuel pools. What's happened is the fuel pools, you know, I mentioned that this irradiated waste is terrifically hot, so you have to keep it in a pool for 5 to 10 years, constantly circulating water 24/7 to keep it from going critical and having an explosion. And so what we should do, what's happened is because there was not Yucca Mountain, there wasn't a place to do it, they kept putting more and more fuel into the same size pool, which is very dangerous. So we think that we should thin the pools out, go back to the amount of fuel that the pools were intended to carry, and get as much as we can out for dry cask storage, which doesn't need the circulation of water, and is a reasonably safe interim step while we figure out what to do with this stuff. I'll note that an operating reactor for cooling purposes uses 1 B as in boy billion gallons of water a day. 1 billion gallons of water a day. Yes, sir.
I have a question. I remember reading a few years ago about new processes in processing nuclear waste, how they could reduce the amount by like 80% or something like that. Is that true, or is that just
I think
propaganda?
Was it reprocessing that you're talking about?
It was like, yeah, reprocessing, refining it again down to like non-hazardous materials.
Right. Well, reprocessing, the idea, this is actually what's done to get plutonium for nuclear weapons. And you take the irradiated fuel rod, you chop it up, you put it in very strong solvents to dissolve it, and then you can chemically separate the different elements. There are several, you know, and on paper it looks like a pretty neat trick. But in reality, there are significant problems. One, you've created vast new waste streams of radioactively contaminated elements, the solvents, for instance. Secondly, you've isolated plutonium. Now, an irradiated fuel rod is so dangerously radioactive, if I tried to steal one, I'd be dead before I got to the door. But I could carry some plutonium in my briefcase. So it's in this proliferation part of the problem. Recycling's not at all a good idea. And lastly, you may have reduced the volume of the waste, but you haven't gotten rid of it. So you still need a repository. So what you've really done is spent a whole lot of money to make a whole lot of more things radioactive, and you still need to deal with the waste. So it's really not a very good solution. Plus, you've given us...
The thing that comes out of it beneficial would be the size of the amount of waste, but everything else kind of, not even that rules because of these solvents and all that.
Right, but the size too, the storage conditions are determined in part by how hot something is. So if it's more concentrated, you know, it doesn't move you where you want to go. Yes?
I believe the last speaker we had from Physicians for Social Responsibility was about 1.5 years ago, and correct me on this, I have it wrong. This gentleman was saying that our Congressman Upton, had systematically undermined the ability of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to apply the safety standards that scientists had developed and that our government had established.
Mm-hmm.
Is this still the case? Is our congressman still undermining the ability of the Regulatory Commission to apply normal expected safety standards to Palisades and other nuclear plants?
I'm afraid there's a lot of truth in what you're saying, that it seems that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission oftentimes seems quite adept at moving the goalposts instead of sticking with the regulations saying you need to meet this. It's a rather industry-friendly regulator. And it's somebody like Representative Upton very much is in support of the nuclear industry. And the nuclear industry really is suffering greatly. The peak number of reactors worldwide was 444 in 2002. It's been going down ever since. Even if they get to build all the new reactors they've ever dreamed of building, the number will be decreasing. An interesting little factoid is that if I tell you that the value of TEPCO shares, Tokyo Electric Power Company, from 2007 to the present has declined by 94%, you're probably not very surprised, because you're going to say, look, they had this terrible accident. Of course, they're not worth very much. But you will be surprised when I tell you that the majority of that decline in value occurred before Fukushima blew up. Same is true with Areva, the big French government-owned company. And whenever somebody points to France and says, well, France does it, why can't we? One question to ask is, do we really want one government-owned company to build the reactors and one government-owned company to operate them? Because that's the system they have in France, with very little transparency. Great. Well, I think it's a good time for us to break. I want to thank you all for coming out. And I will be around later afterwards to talk, as will Stephanie from PSR Michigan and Kevin from Beyond Nuclear. Thank you very much.